Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm actually going to pick up and kind of elaborate on a conversation I just had in a video I recorded, and that's a conversation of like the digital media versus physical media. And obviously this is a conversation that other people have had. People have actually had for a very long time. There's always been that conversation of like, yeah, even though you paid for something and you have it digitally, is it technically yours? Could that always kind of be taken from you? Because didn't Apple have that issue for a while? I might be misquoting that, so do not quote me on that, but I was like, I don't know if that was ever resolved, where it's like people would digitally buy like movies or something, and then it's just kind of like, oh yeah, they lost the licensing rights to it, so technically you don't have that anymore. Because even when you are buying a movie or whatever, you're not actually buying the movie digitally, you're actually just buying the licensing rights to keep it for now. So it's not yours, it's yours for now type of situation. And obviously we've seen this more and more when it comes to obviously like the Warner Brothers conversation about, man, all the people who had the rug pulled under them, where it's like, oh yeah, here's this show that you made that you thought like, oh, it's on a streaming service forever. Yeah, it's gone. We'll pull it off. Oh, can I get a, because I remember there was that conversation, could some of the creators were like, can we get a copy or something of the thing that we made, that it doesn't just completely disappear? I don't know if that ever, I have to look into that too, because I don't know if that ever got completely resolved. Because I remember a prime example of that was the Batgirl directors for the movie. They were like, could we get a copy? I don't know. I know there was the funeral screenings for, but I don't remember if they were able to ever keep any copies or not. Maybe they were. But it's that conversation, because like stuff, especially digitally, can be kind of like, yeah, you kind of don't have the licensing rights for that stuff. And obviously that's going to be something that kind of develops and changes. I mean, like I said, this is me basing it off, you know, even more recent events, and I'm sure that's still kind of changing the conversation, because you also get into that territory of, well, not only did you like take this thing off, and the reason why people do that is because, well, this thing isn't worth paying the money to keep this up here, because we have to pay out royalties and stuff to maybe some of the actors and then the writers, which that has been a recent conversation about, like the royalty rights and stuff like that to like actors and stuff, like when it comes to the whole streaming stuff. Like no, I think specific to writers. I don't know if the same thing applies to actors. I'm sure they're kind of getting what they're owed, but like writers aren't getting the residuals that they should be getting for stuff that's streaming. So, but obviously the big conversation too is like I was saying, that stuff can kind of be taken down at any point in time, specifically just because it's cheaper to just like get rid of something even though you kind of own it, just because you don't want to continuously have to pay those licensing rights to keep it around and pay out the people you have to pay out. That's where like the Warner Brothers Discovery thing was. That's why they were pulling so many things just for that purpose. It's like, right, if this thing was doing something for us in the long run, sure, we'd keep it up here, but the amount of money we're going to have to pay out in the long run and continuing to keep this thing around that's not meriting us enough money, meriting its own existence, which is very callous, but that's the business side of things. Once again, I understand it. Still doesn't mean it doesn't sting and suck, you know. But obviously, like that conversation really, I feel like you know, comes up the most with Netflix, because Netflix loses the licensing rights. I say loses, but they choose not to re-up the licensing rights for a lot of stuff, and it's something I have to constantly remind myself. I know that information, that just because something says it's a Netflix original doesn't 100% mean that Netflix owns it. I mean, even if they did, it's still that conversation of, well, we have to pay out the licensing rights, that if we keep this thing, we're going to have to constantly like deal out money for residuals and royalties and stuff like that. So there's part of the conversation, but there is also the thing of they're just straight up licensing stuff that's not theirs. Like for example, show Travelers, that was original. It's a Canadian show that in Canada it aired on TV except for the third season. The third one ended up being final season. Very much like, because here in the US, seasons 1 and 2 were exclusively Netflix seasons, but in Canada it's not until the third season that it became exclusively a Netflix show. So it's kind of that thing. That was another show, I think it's just like, right, it aired in Canada first, and then we just got the licensing right, and I think it just like simultaneously, like it happens from time to time. But like I was bringing up, like sometimes it's like, right, we just don't want the licensing fees. That's where like the Office situation and the Friends situation come about. I mean, there's also companies being like, yeah, we'll pay to take that off your platform. Or once again, it's just too much money to keep this going. So there's that. But keeping along with that conversation, like I was saying, getting to the point I'm making, sorry, before I kind of went on a little bit of a diatribe, but it's still all connected. Show Hemlock Grove. If I'm not mistaken, I'm fairly certain that's no longer on Netflix. That's one of like Netflix's older original series. It came out, what, 2014, 2015 maybe? It's no longer on Netflix. I want to say I think the licensing, I think they got rid of that like last year in 2022, I think, which is so funny to say that considering we're only like a couple days into 2023. I want to say it was 2022. So it's one of those things like, yeah, that's a Netflix original, but it's like, yeah, probably not enough people are watching it from time to time. So it's like, yeah, let's kind of get rid of it. So that's where we kind of get to that conversation of, you know, digital and physical. Like, hey, you might want to like physically get some of this stuff because you never know when the said streaming service will be like, and that's gone. I mean, it happens once TV. It still boggles your mind when you're like, oh, it's a TV show and a Netflix original like that they decided to do that. But you know, once again, it just comes down to a licensing right, which is so interesting too, considering Netflix. There was a whole point years ago they made where they were saying like, right, they eventually want to get to the point where 50% of their content is someone else's content and 50% of it is their own. And I don't know if eventually they plan to completely change that. And I don't know if they've said where they want to make it. Now it's like, no, we want to make it like 80% our content, 20% someone else's, because once again, those licensing fees and stuff like that. But you would eventually still get to that point where you're just like, I'm paying to keep this thing up here that no one's watching anymore. So I mean, I know that Stranger Things is the juggernaut that it is, but I mean, given you never know of at some point down the future. I mean, we don't all know where all of this heading. Like, it could be to a point they're just Netflix is like, yeah, it's not worth keeping Stranger Things anymore. It was a juggernaut for us, but how many people are going back and rewatching older seasons? I mean, that's a whole conversation in itself. Like I said, not saying that's going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, but you never know where all this could be. I mean, will Netflix even be a thing in 20 years? It's just an interesting conversation. But going back to the point I was also making was about physical media. I'm not saying that it's like, oh man, I'm a collector, I get a whole bunch of physical media. It's just like, it just happened by happenstance. Most things I like, I don't collect DVDs, but for a long time my mom did. But that's not because she went out of her way because she was a collector. It's just simply because there were no streaming services obviously at that time. And so DVDs were the only way you could like watch a movie unless it came on TV. So that's the only way to watch the newest movies. So, but I'm like that with video games. Not on purpose, but it just happened to be what it is. Like, I've all like 95% of the games I own are physical copies, but everything else I own is just physical. I'm kind of just, I mean, that's just kind of a me thing, but obviously that's been a conversation people have had about the digital versus physical stuff of like, yeah, you want to physically own stuff because that way it actually is yours and not just the whole, oh, you own this. You're not, you know, it's not just that we're licensing out for you to own this, and at any point in time we could technically lose the licensing for it, meaning that you could technically lose access to this thing that you own type of situation. So it's a very interesting conversation. Obviously, this is just me adding my 2 cents to a long-standing conversation that people have had before now, and I'm sure will continue to happen in the future. Like I said, especially with the whole Warner Brothers Discovery thing. I think there's still trickling effects from that because I think that's still happening even to now. But obviously, these are just my thoughts. Like I said, it was just a topic I brought up in another video that I was like, oh, I could expand upon that and make it kind of a whole topic of discussion in its own right. But like I said, these are just my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours in the comments down below. I'm curious, do most of the things you own, are you a physical copy type of person, or do you have most things you own digital? Like, same thing for movies and TV shows. Are most of the movies and TV shows you watch, do you actually, maybe you have exceptions like, oh, maybe you have all of Lost, or maybe you have all of like Fringe on DVD or something like, or Blu-ray. You know, I don't own any TV show, full box sets of any TV shows, even the ones I really love. That is something I need to look into, just because even some of the stuff I love, that like a Lucifer, for example, that's on Netflix, but who knows how long that'd be. So I probably wouldn't want to grab that because I do love and adore that show. So that's kind of an example of something I probably should like look into, you know. But like I said, just let me know all your thoughts. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.